The most incredible thing about man is never mentioned and possibly not recognized. He keeps looking for a solution that not only evades him, appears impossible to find. The entire history of our species and the history of every individual one of us can be said to share this one characteristic: we are all looking for a solution that does not appear to exist. One of the problems we have, as a species, is that no one is tracking our progress. Perhaps it could be said most of us do not even agree on what the solution is that we look for. Even if we agree that Muslims, Christians and atheists all want a solution, most of the people in these groups will assume the solution, whatever it is, does not contain the other two groups. Which brings up the question of what is a solution that excludes a large percentage of the world's population. Will a solution in China include the Americas and Europe? But has anyone even been able to articulate what the problem is? We know we have problems. In fact there are at least 10 major ones: unemployment, debt, poverty, inflation, pollution, waste, taxation, homelessness, war, and crime. The astute observer may note these are largely a condemnation of the state. Yet, the state remains the vehicle through which our solutions are filtered. Religion was supposed to be a solution, so was our various economic systems. Political parties and the policies are also touted as a solution. But what is the problem all of our efforts are directed against, or is there a single cause to everything, or must we continue this ad hoc approach? If there were no source of our problems would not all be interconnected. However, let's look at the situation from another perspective. What is the ideal situation we are trying to achieve? If there is no destination, how can there be direction? And if there is no direction, we are living in a relativistic universe where there is no good or evil and no better and worse. We cannot have a solution unless there is a path to follow. However, this is precisely what we have been missing. We are all trying to get somewhere but fighting with each other concerning the direction we ought to go and how to get there. We all want less crime, but we do not agree what crime is or what procedures would reduce it and what methods add to crime. The differences are so extreme. There are persons who think policing adds to crime. But if we could find a wizard who would grant us a wish and we wished for a solution to our problems, what sort of world would we encounter? What would be its most prominent feature? The probability is we would all be relatively equal. It is not that inequality is the source of our problems, but our problems do generate inequality. However, the most likely feature would be found in the economy, and it would exist because the economy has been made extremely productive. It is not so much that scarcity leads to inequality but that low productivity to consumption ratios will exacerbate whatever inequality that exists. Productivity must be such that we have deflation. Now deflation is probably the most feared condition that modern persons are likely to encounter. Deflation is impossible for economists and politicians to think about without dread. Yet, if a wizard was to create a solution for us, he would create for us an economy that was deflating. Let me explain why. Now think of a subsistence culture in which everyone makes their own rudimentary tools and weapons. We have equality because consumption is so low every family can maintain itself. But imagine one man who is inspired to perfect the art of making arrowheads. The tribe would soon realize it no longer pays to make arrowheads. It is cheaper to permit the one man to make all the arrowheads needed while they supply this artisan with the things he needs. And so, we have a rudimentary economy created because the value of arrowheads deflated, that is, were lowered in price relative to the rest of the economic goods. Now if other tribes people began to make gourds, hunt professionally or raise the needed livestock and so on. No one could afford to maintain a subsistence lifestyle. It would no longer be economically sustainable. It would be so cheap to buy what one needed on the open market that the tribe and surrounding tribes would all become part of a free market. The question then becomes if there is some power or authority able to stop this process from continuing to the point where it becomes a modern economy. And there is. This is the state. The state is a parasite that sees a surplus and uses power to expropriate it. The state acts in the same way any protection racket does. That there are states engaging in rapine makes it possible for another state to guarantee that the artisan will be free of the rapacious acts of other state actors, if they willingly fund the needs of the state. But the state cannot stop exploitive behavior by others, unless the state's subjects fund the state's activities. The choice is to be robbed by force, or to submit willingly. If the person making arrowheads was making 10 a day and the state began to expropriate 5 arrowheads would double in price, the price would inflate. So it would go with everything being produced and taxed. Deflation would transform into inflation. The state does not have to be in the form of a modern state. Any group that is required to support the predation of a more powerful group, is technically subjects of a state. Even criminal gangs are ruled by a de facto state. But as criminals are parasite, the entire gang constitutes an ad hoc type of government. Most of us are frightened of anarchy. With good reason. Even if most people would just carry on with their lives, there would always be the rogue element. For the most part the majority could deal with a few bad actors, but what of the case where there were two parties that could not reconcile their differences, and the broader community began to take sides? Who has the authority to intervene and impose a solution? It might not happen often, but there is every expectation the odd disagreement would spiral down into something resembling the Hatfields and McCoys. We are keeping the lid on things through protection payments. Various groups such as the natives, blacks, the poor, the rich and other special interest groups protest for special rights, and to some extent, get them. The world does not understand the problem, however. Because they suffer from the same disease, they are blind to the manifestation of it, in others. So, they subscribe the problem to other causes. We blame crime on poverty, but even the wealthiest are corrupt, so we blame the corruption on a lust for power, but even the most disposed join gangs and impose their will over the weak through violence and intimidation, and we blame this on a need to feel important, saying these gang members did not get enough love or attention. What we do not do is say the evildoer never learned to humble himself before his God. This lust for wealth, fame and power are all part of a desire to be God. We worship idols as a path to godhood. We are in a war, but it is a war against God. Christians were told to separate. This is not a suggestion to think differently or join a different institution. We are a people set apart for a different purpose. This is not a cultural war so much as a cosmic war between realities and two races of beings, the saved and unsaved. We do not get to be on the side of truth without dying to the cult of the wrong. We must die to the flesh because it is the flesh that seeks a path to deification. The idol, or pagan god, represents a human facet we have deified. The god of war deifies our propensity for war, even our love of war. We become gods or godlike through war. Now, if we ask those of the world what is wrong and what the solution is, they could not say, but they would offer a multitude of excuses, all harking back to the three main issues mentioned above. But even then, they know these are not true solutions, only suggestions to alleviate the problem somewhat. But even their approach suggests there is a multitude of problems that requires a multitude of solutions, none of which we can actually afford. This conclusion is due to the solutions they give being a part of the problem we actually face. There is only one solution because logically, morally and theoretically, there can only be one problem. Problems cannot arise spontaneously. They have to have an antecedent. If the problem does not have a solution, then the problem is a symptom, not the problem. We spend our days and our dollars responding to symptoms, rather than addressing the real problem. We must go back to the Creator to understand the issue. We need to go back to Eden, where man took what God created and which he had no right to. Every problem comes from a lie and a theft. A lie is told to justify a theft, and from this all our problems come, big and small, major and minor. Everything has an owner, and every evil and sin has a lie and a theft behind it. With a clear analysis, a clear solution emerges naturally. We need to stop parasitism, and the first place to begin is with ourselves. We must first stop claiming to own what belongs to God. This is why we were given the church, to enable us to separate from this world system and end parasitism, especially that directed against the things belonging to God. As is the case with the rich young man, the story Christians reject, we must divest ourselves of our wealth, because this is what belongs to God. This divestment is not commanded because it benefits God, it is required because it is the first step to the elimination of parasitism. The Church, in this guise, operates as a holding company. Investors are given preferred shares issued by the Church as a type of currency that can be used in the Church for the goods and services available in the Church. In this scenario, the Church is akin to a market. We work for the Church and are paid for the work we do, by the Church. This enables us to eliminate unemployment, taxation, and the state itself. Without the state and with the elimination of parasitism, there are no problems. We are made perfect, through the Church, as our Father in heaven is perfect. This cannot be accomplished as individuals. It is done through the Church as the Church eliminates parasitism. As we are perfected by the Church, through the Church, we eliminate parasitism, and as parasitism is banished, our problems are ended, finally and completely.